Fingers?
Mittens. Not to be confused with mittens.
It's shells that were overrun by dirt and just a bunch of shells along the seashore. Because shells, like it's sort of like a slope, and you see all the shells.
Yeah, so all of you are right in a way, except, I mean, there's no mittens in it, but mittens are kind of layers of shell, and this is where the First Nations groups would put their shells when they're done with them, after they're done shucking them. They'd put them in the same pile over and over and over again, and they'd also burn over top. So sometimes you can see the layer of shell, a layer of like black charcoal, and then layer of shell, and you can see the layers. So what that tells us is that for many years these the Indigenous group has been putting their shells here. So that's another piece of evidence to say that we are here and that we were here, which is really important, especially today, because Indigenous people, as some of you may know, always have to be proving that we're Indigenous, or that, you know, we occupied a space. But in our hearts we know it's true, that we've all lived in a specific place, that our people have always lived there, and it's just really awesome to see the evidence of that. So the Coast Salish people mainly have mittens because that's what our food source is. So other Indigenous groups may have a different way of getting rid of their food sources, but it might be cool and like a little bit of homework to see what your Indigenous group, or maybe just to see what they ate. Even that would be really cool for next time, for a next conversation, because we don't always have to speak about Xwaaqw'um. That's where we are, but I'd love to honor everybody's background here. So yeah, if you guys want, if that's something you want to do, totally, let's have a conversation about it next time. But the mittens are just around the corner, so let's get going. Alrighty, so I wanted to share a bit about this. You can see that there's evidence of shells right in there, and this is a tree root. So, you know, whenever this tree fell down, I'm not sure when it did, you can imagine how old it is. This tree has to be maybe 100 years old. So when it was in the ground, those shells were underneath and the roots took hold of it. So when it fell over, you can see it now, but you can imagine just how old this mitten is. You know, if it's a couple hundred years old, that's prior to colonization, that's prior to settlement. So that again proves that that we were here. This is just part of it. There's more up here where you can actually see the layers more, and it's a bit longer. So that was probably the actual mitten, but it's hard to say how long it was. Like, it could have been this whole stretch that's filled with shells. Something else that's really cool about the shells, and maybe gives evidence that it wasn't just a garbage pile or a compost pile. Shells actually have really cool, like, balancing properties. They have a good way of balancing the pH in soil. So if it's too acidic, the shells will fix it. If it's too basic, the shells will fix it. So there's something called bicarbonate in the shells which do that. So it'd be interesting to see, or to ask elders, were the mittens just a compost pile, or were they actually used to help fertilize soil? So yeah, that's just a cool little fact about it. But again, there's another mitten down here that we can check out.
So a lot of you guys have families who do a lot of amazing gardening, and they know that the soil is important. Like, you take really good care of your soil and feed it well, then you'll have the good growth. So I'm hearing, as Maiya saying, that maybe that they were, you know, there's a lot of scientific knowledge that came with the practice of thousands of years. And maybe they were finding ways of making the soil rich for whatever that they were wanting to plant or harvest.
And that's coming back to being a land steward too. Indigenous people all over, like, you didn't just, you know, expect the land to care for you. It was always a reciprocal relationship, meaning when the land gives something to you, you give something back. So returning these shells to the land is giving something back, is giving more nutrients to the soil. And also there's I sat on a panel earlier last year that talked about marine life and blue and green carbon. So we were talking about old growth forests in one of these conversations, and one of the men there that was speaking, that was one of like the main speakers, he said, I really don't like it when people call it old growth forests. They're indigenous forests, because indigenous people have always tended to the land, always did controlled burns, made sure that there wasn't too many trees to shade out the shrubs and berries and different things like that. They always tended to the land. It's not really, you know, how we see forestry today, where you cut down a tree and replace it with something different. There's always a certain way to do things and to have space to let things grow. So yeah, I think in my head, you know, if it were me back then, I think that having shells as a fertilizer is brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah, so Maiya touched on a really important word, reciprocity, and we've had a bit of conversation in our settings with that, so I think it's something we'll go back to maybe when we get to the fire later. But reciprocity, the Indigenous way of in relationship, always being, if we're taking, we're giving, including thanks in advance, and then thereafter. So when you're talking about the old growth forest, I think what I'm hearing you say is that it wasn't just random. It didn't just, that through a lot of intentionality of wise people, they created the most amazing opportunities for these forests to grow. Again, with 7 generations in mind, that they want this for not just their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and so on and so on, but 7 lines down. So I like that, indigenous forests. Settlers is another word, and that's something you guys we often hear, and I'm wondering if everybody knows when we're referencing settlers or the time of colonial influence, what are we talking about? Jackson?
Outside European and other countries coming to the other lands like here and colonizing the land that's not theirs and taking the land.
And what does that colonizing mean?
It means when you go to new grounds that people haven't, I guess, discovered or explored quite yet. So you come and you colonize it and take it. But technically we didn't colonize it because the indigenous people were already here first.
Yeah,
and
they were
just
here
took the land
first.
from them.
Those are just words I hear often people say, and I'm like, I wonder if kids know what those 2 words mean, because they're pretty big. Settlers, they came and settled in a place that wasn't theirs, often taking without asking. And the colonial, I think there's a little bit more. That would be another one we should chew on a bit, because the word colonial, has some layers too. So let's ponder that. Thank you for that. Awesome. Well done, Evan. Let's meander on to
We get rations, unfortunately. So that names are important, especially Halfreen and name.
How is your bread with your bread?
My bread is berry bread. I like bread. Bread.
Bread.
This is the bush, I don't know what to call this, hardwood that they use to when you see like mass dancers or yeah, I guess it's just mass dancers when they have their circle and they have all their shells on it. This is the type of wood they use
to make
the circle.
Oh.
Yeah.